Hello and welcome back to The Independent Pianist. I'm Cole, your host, and today we're looking at another one of the Chopin Etudes, a really exciting, powerful piece, the C-sharp minor Etude, sometimes referred to as the Torrent. In my view, this is a very difficult etude, although not necessarily the most difficult out of Chopin's many etudes, but it probably does hold the place as what I would consider to be the most helpful of all the Chopin etudes. So simply meaning that if you were to come to me and say, Cole, I really want to improve my piano playing. I hate playing etudes, but I know I need to do one. What etude would you recommend that I play? I would be very tempted to recommend this particular etude of Chopin. So why is that? I mean, first off, just to learn the notes and to get the fingerings figured out and everything is not that difficult. Sure, it'll take you a little bit of time, but I think most late intermediate, early advanced pianists could figure this piece out in a little while, probably with a couple weeks of practice. Beyond that, the figurations that Chopin throws at you in this etude are very, very conducive to getting you comfortable using your thumb on the black keys. And if you've ever had a lesson with me or followed some of my other videos, you probably know that I consider that to be kind of a key technique to master to really take your technique to an advanced level. You can get away with playing a lot of pre-19th century music without ever using your thumb on a black key. But once you get into the romantics like Chopin and Liszt and Brahms and whoever else, if you're not comfortable playing a complicated figuration with your thumb landing on the black key quite frequently, then you're going to have a great deal of trouble really feeling comfortable with this music. And Chopin is quite merciless in developing this in his student right from the beginning. You start with this figuration, which right away puts you in a position where your thumb is on the C sharp, is on the black note. And then the figuration that follows that. As you can see, you just have to, you're using 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're going up the scale. So every time your thumb has to go on a black key. Beyond that, the other reason why this might be one of the most useful of all the etudes is because it's very equal opportunity between the right and the left hands. And Chopin had a little bit of a reputation, unfairly given, I think, of being a right-hand composer. And it's true that in many of the etudes, he does live up to that kind of reputation. You know, you'd have to be foolish and totally ignoring his other major works like the sonatas and the ballades and so forth, which have very highly developed left-hand parts, to really think that Chopin was a right-hand composer. But when he was kind of showing off various technical tricks that the piano is capable of, he did tend to focus a little bit more on the right hand. So a high percentage of the etudes from Opus 10 and Opus 25 do feature the right hand quite a bit. Now, granted, there are some excellent left-hand studies, like the Revolutionary Etude, or the Opus 25 number 4 in A minor Etude with all the leaps in the left hand. Those are all excellent studies, of course, as well, and will do a lot for your left-hand technique, but there's really nothing that's quite as difficult as this one. I don't even think the Revolutionary Etude has a left-hand part which is as difficult as this left-hand part. A lot of the things are just cruelly awkward that you're asked to play in the left hand. However, if you really work on this and come at it from an intelligent point of view, you're going to improve your technique no matter what. Even if you never get the piece to quite as rapid a tempo as Chopin asks for, you're really going to feel like everything else after this is a lot easier for both hands. So let's walk through this a little bit and discuss what's going on musically and also technically. So I already discussed a little bit of the first figuration that we get in this piece. We get this kind of circular motion. Oh, by the way, before I get too far into this, I should mention too that the metronome marking that Chopin gives here, which is 88 for a half note, which is very, very rapid indeed, I think is perhaps a little bit too fast from a musical standpoint. Of course, you're free to disagree, and I've heard successful performances of this at that tempo. It does give it a little bit of a hyperactive, almost cartoonish sound, though. I think right around 80 for the half note is a more grim and effective sounding tempo, and it's still incredibly difficult, so you'll still get plenty of technical practice if you aim for that tempo. So anyway, as I was saying though, here we are with the second little motive, the second technical figuration which Chopin throws at us, which is this one. This little trill kind of thing with a high note, which stays the same. Now, this figuration you might see in some editions a rather interesting fingering. In the manuscript, Chopin doesn't give a fingering, but in most of the other editions you might see, like the Paderewski edition, the Cortot, the Friedman, among others. You'll see this quite interesting fingering 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 5, 1, 3, 2, 5, 1, 3, 2, 5. And that seems like, oh, that's harder than it needs to be. Why not just do 1, 2, 1, 5, 1, 2, 1, 5, 1, 2, 1, 5? And you can do that. I found that this fingering is actually strikingly effective, particularly in the left hand, which we'll get to in just a second, because it kind of makes your hand perform a little circle, which is a little more so than if you did this. If you're just using your thumb over and over again, you get stuck into a slightly more static position of the hand. Whereas this, you end up performing these little circles, which actually I find relaxes me quite a bit. Having said that, I do like to do the last one, 1, 2, 1, 5, just because of the stretch and how awkward it is. I just found for me that it worked a little bit better. And I'm going to look at that in the left hand in just a moment. But right now, let's look at the third figuration that we have, which is this one. Quite difficult. So here, you're spanning, again, a space of over an octave, a 10th, or even an 11th at one point. And obviously, you don't want to actually have your hand stretched out to cover that interval. This technique which Chopin is showing us here, it requires a lot of this looseness in the arm and this kind of back and forth circling motion. It's very closely related to two other etudes that are also highly useful. The Aeolian harp etude, in which you also will find yourself performing these kinds of circles, and also the Opus 10 number 1 etude. Similarly here, you're covering a 10th with your hand, and you have to use your arm and wrist to help you cover that. You can't really, I mean, even if you can reach it, you don't want to just lock your hand in the position of a 10th, because it's way too tense. And you won't be able to play the entire piece. So in this figuration, the Paderewski edition, which is usually a very wonderful early urtext edition, it was from like the 40s or 50s. Paderewski actually had very little to do with it apparently, although I guess the fingerings are mostly his. But this particular place is a place where the Paderewski edition might lead you a little bit astray because of the way they've notated this. In the original first edition, Chopin gives this second note in each beat an eighth note stem up. And the editors of the Paderewski edition have added also a 16th note stem at the end of the beat. So bringing this little motive out of the texture. And this is motivic. This motive does figure into the piece later on. You'll hear later on that there's that little kind of falling motive actually occurs in other shapes. However, I don't think that that's particularly why Chopin marked that eighth note stem. I think he was trying to show us that the second finger is acting as a fulcrum here. That's where we're turning around with the arm and the hand. you can kind of feel it, that point is where you're kind of turning around, is the second finger. If you just had it there, you could kind of you could kind of do these little circles. So it will feel, when you're playing at speed, it will feel like you are holding that note down a little longer. And it's kind of a technical thing. I think he's just showing us that is the point where you actually want to be focused when you're playing this. All very good. And then after that we have some broken octaves. Last little technique. The broken octaves aren't really referenced very much outside of the main theme. In fact, I don't know if they're referenced at all. It's more like just a little extra sauce, a little extra spice thrown in. Now we get all that stuff in the left hand. So here's that pattern again. And this fingering that you'll find in many editions. Instead of just playing 2, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, many editions will tell you to do 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 2, 3, 1, 4, 2, 3, 1, 4, 2, 3, 1. And I very much recommend that fingering. It's going to feel crazy at first when you're practicing it, because the fourth finger, it feels like you have to squish the fourth finger in to this very small space, especially on the last one. A sharp, B, A sharp, F double sharp. But again, it gets your hand more mobile. It gets your hand more loose in position. So actually, when you go fast, it feels very, very easy and very loose. The other fingering will feel a little bit more tense, and because your hand is stretched out in the last, doing this, it's going to feel a little more tense. This way, you can see that my hand actually moves more. So even though it takes maybe a little bit of a learning curve to get used to that strange fingering, it really is going to pay you great dividends when you're trying to play the piece faster. It really works. It gives the same very awkward figuration in the left hand. And then we have a new continuation. In the repeat of this idea, Chopin goes toward the subdominant, the minor subdominant, a fairly common move. It's a very dramatic moment, this. And I feel like this particular moment can use a little bit of time. Many people just play it straight through, but I think that there is a certain kind of rhetorical nature to this piece. Even though for the most part you want to keep in steady tempo, there's a few moments where you can highlight some of Chopin's markings. So for example, that he marks these as staccato eighth notes, but this is a quarter with an accent, which is right where the music goes to a new, tonicizes the minor four. And now we get into kind of a development section where these two motives, the go back and forth between the right and left hand. And it gets very, very awkward. Each time, Chopin was renowned for this. You know, he's absolutely merciless. As the music gets more and more complicated, your hands just kind of get more and more stretched into these difficult positions that you have to just navigate as best you can. Then this brings us to one of the most difficult passages in the entire piece, which is this one. So Chopin writes that you have to play a quarter note with your thumb and then a figuration on top in 16ths. And I have to admit here that I did a little skillful rewriting for the first 4 measures of this passage. So I played the quarter note in my left hand which means you have to play the bottom two notes staccato because they're eighth notes. It does facilitate this passage quite a lot. I mean, it's still a difficult passage, but it makes it much, much easier. Now, I suppose that from a strictly philosophical point of view, I shouldn't have done this because the whole point of the piece is to develop our technique, and so I should make use of every possible opportunity to play the most difficult version. And most of the time I would follow that. You know, most of the time I don't do re-fingerings. For example, in the Opus 10 number 1 that I just mentioned, I'm not much in favor of playing alternative fingerings that allow you to play it without having to do the 10th. Some people play that way. 1, 3, 5, 2. I mean, I think that's kind of ridiculous because that really does change the sound of the music. It changes the effect of the music very, very much. In this case, I couldn't discern that it really changed the effect of the music that much because I could differentiate the articulation easily enough, and it just made it smoother and more fluid to play. So, also from the point of view of a strictly technical approach of wanting to get the maximum technical benefit, you're coming up on 2 bars, which are probably the hardest in the entire piece, where you cannot rewrite in any way. Here, this right-hand figuration, it's the same figuration but with jumps. That's one of the most absolute nasty, difficult passages to play in the entire piece. And I think you have a couple options there, unless you're able to just blow through it really easily, but there's a couple options. You can either lower the dynamics a little bit, and then you'll be able to play in time, or you can do what I did and introduce a little bit, again, of a rubato here, which I think is actually effective. Because I think that there is kind of a shape which Chopin is showing us with the slurs, which connect beats 2 to 3. But this is kind of a lunge. So I think that actually works quite well to kind of make that little gesture. It facilitates very slightly this extremely difficult passage. And then after that, it blessedly gets a little easier to play. Chopin quite marvelously rewrites the pattern, this pattern, to include a repeated note. It's a great, just spine-tingling moment in the piece. And the idea of this motive, which spans a 10th, is then developed in the left hand with arpeggios that span a 10th, kind of like Opus 10 number 1. I use a very unusual fingering here on the left hand, so this part is normal. But at the end, I just drop over my 5th finger to play the next note. I think most people would probably try to put another thumb in there, but I found it a little nicer if my hands coincided at that point when they changed position. So just my little idea there. And yeah, all this stuff is super difficult. All that is quite difficult. You have to practice it a lot. There's not really any other secret, unfortunately, than practicing it. And then there's kind of a recap, and then we get the coda. Now in the coda, the coda is kind of a special difficulty because this part is fine. That's easy enough when you just have 8 notes in your left hand. But when you get 16s, see this pattern, the pattern is inverted in the left hand. neither hand by itself is that hard, but when you put them together, it's really, really difficult. It's really difficult to keep the beats together. Your fifth finger in the left hand is going to want to get on the beat. So it's very difficult. You need to practice with exaggerated accents, I think. And with the fifth finger quite light. I also think of there being just a little bit of a breath in between. And then this is kind of funny. This flourish at the end sounds like it should be easy. That sounds like it shouldn't be that much of a problem, right? It's actually one of the most awkward things in the entire piece. Again, you have to play a repeated note and then a 10th arpeggio. So this is exactly the figuration. It's this figuration again. So you're getting this. And it's quite awkward. See, I messed it up right there. It's quite awkward and difficult. So Chopin's original fingering here, I recommend changing if your hand is big enough. Originally he writes 2, 5, 4, 1, 2, 5, 4. Doesn't work for me very well. Perhaps just because my hand is relatively big, I found that I needed to use my third finger on the C sharp. It's much more secure that way. Maybe for someone with smaller hands, the 4-5 is going to feel just fine. For me, it feels always a little cramped somehow and not very comfortable using the fourth finger there. My hand is actually in a very natural shape this way with the third finger. The fourth finger, not quite so much. So there you have it. That's my little tutorial on this piece. Of course, if you were actually studying this piece with me, I would go more in depth about how to handle the metronome. You have to practice with the metronome quite a lot to master a piece like this, and kind of the techniques for doing that. But you get kind of an idea of some solutions that you can use to make this piece a little easier, at the very least, and to understand what's going on. So I do reiterate, I do think that this is one of the most useful etudes. It's a great etude to use as a warm-up on concert days when you want to just get your fingers going and your blood flowing and so forth. I know Hans von Bülow also mentioned the etude in sixths from Opus 25. It's another one which makes a very good use of both hands in double notes and sixths. But I would say that this one is just as useful as that one as a warm-up. So yeah, great idea if you know the piece well and you've learned it well and you want to have something to warm up with on concert days. This is definitely a go-to. To which I would also add that etude in sixths and the first of the Godowsky Chopin etudes, I think, is another excellent warm-up piece if you know it, if you've practiced it and you know it well. Yeah, so I think that's about it. So thank you very much for watching. Please do consider supporting the channel. I really depend upon my loyal Patreon supporters, so thank you if you have become a supporter. You can also go check out my Patreon page because I have my albums up there. So I've remastered and done some editing on various of the recordings that I've used for this channel. Sometimes I've re-recorded things as well. So far I have my first book of the Année de Pèlerinage by Liszt, and I have the complete Schubert impromptus up there. So you can download those in high-quality WAV files and put them on your phone or on your iPod or whatever. Does anyone use iPods anymore? My gosh, I might be dating myself by even mentioning that device. Probably put it on your phone or, what have you. So, yeah. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you guys next week. I'll probably be talking some more next week. I wanted to do a little continuation on last week's video on living pianists. But until then, take care. Keep practicing. I'll see you next time.